afternoon for the people on site and also the people following us through social networks. Thank you for joining to this space that we have prepared in the socialization and dissemination phase of the Truth Commission report. The Truth Commission is delivering the sustainability report and with a ongoing reflection these 2 days, which has been what contributes. The Truth Commission contributes, and today, in this space, in this venue, the comprehensive system for peace to transitional justice in the world. But also, in other sessions, we have had the chance to do a reverse reflection. What contributions we had from the world of transitional justice for the Truth Commission. So it's really an honor to wrap up these 2 days that have been surrounded by multiple and diverse partners that the Truth Commission has had throughout this journey and give accountability. And yesterday, we had the 7 people who are part of the monitoring and surveillance committee for the implementation of the recommendations for non-repetition. They are still in this room, so thank you all for remaining with us. We close these 2 days with this session. The construction of the Truth Commission, the contribution of the Truth Commission and the comprehensive system for peace to the practice of transitional justice. We have heard these days how innovative the result of the negotiations of Point 5 was. We've had several international experts that have reminded this aspect and have requested to see how valuable it is what we did. Sometimes it is hard to look at the perspective, and that's wonderful. We had a wonderful conversation organized. 2 people are on their way, but we don't want to delay more these 2 people. We have asked them to follow the beginning of this conversation through the channels, YouTube channels, and therefore I welcome Stefan Peters. As you have seen these 2 days, we have always, for the beginning of this, every section, the presentation, the introduction of one reflection, one position, academic practice, and in regards to the topic that will be considered, and subsequently move on to the conversation between considering the different perspectives. Let's begin with Stefan Peters, academic director of CAPAZ Institute and professor of Universität Listen in Germany. He studied political science and conflict studies in MAPP University and Complutense University of Madrid. During the mandate of the Commission, CAPAZ was alive for the work of this node in Germany as well as many other research projects. Alfredo Molano Bravo, and in the face of the implementation of the agency for the massive dissemination, CAPAZ has been always also allied of the unit of missing persons. So it's a strategic ally, Stefan, in this space. Thank you very much for your willingness. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for having me here, and at the same time for the invitation to be part in this closing panel. A closing panel is a challenge. To speak in a closing panel is an additional challenge because we have talked about many things that we should say here during these last 2 days. What I would like to do is, I'll try not to repeat, but basically a reflection on which have been the achievements of the comprehensive system, but also what are some of the challenges that the comprehensive system is facing. I would like to start off by mentioning the achievements. Start with something that Patrick the Rule mentioned yesterday and during the first panel during the inauguration. If I'm not wrong, he asked, why is it that the international community has so much tenderness towards Colombia? And he answered that maybe it's because the quality of people, all what Colombia means. And maybe this just wasn't one point, but I would say that there is one more. Colombia arrives in the international politics with hope, knowing that the peace process is not easy, but look what's happening in the world. And here it's moving on. Yeah, it's true. I can imagine we would have loved more a faster process. We are in a peace process thanks to a peace negotiation. What we see is the power of word, but the aim is to reflect on the achievements and then the challenges of the comprehensive system. Achievements. I believe that you have achieved a lot in the investigations, in the hearings. For example, what happened in Ocaña, for example, what happened in Bogota, and of course, the report. The report of the commission along with the transmedia. It's fundamental for the ownership, which has been considered during these 2 days also. But not only you have not only done your job, you have had an impact that goes beyond 6,200, 402. We know what that number means. That is in some walls and places of the city. It's part of what the daily living is of the people, and not only in Bogota. That is an immense achievement. There is something that the magistrate Miral mentioned. The street is calling, or is talking to us. And the hashtag, there is future if there is truth, hay futuro si hay verdad, in Spanish. The importance of this, especially around June 28th. Even more, those days, Ricardo Coverol from the Commission said that you can purchase online the report with tamales and beer. So in the market, doesn't tell lies, does not lie. There's an interest in that. So I believe that's something that you have achieved. And you have achieved also to get the interest of the people, almost everybody. Why? Because that system has several um, new aspects, differential approaches, and I will continue to mention some of the challenges and problems that it has. The centralization of the victims, the chapter of the exile, all that I think are bullets that we must highlight, and also we could say we have done something, we have achieved something in the context, in a difficult context, neither from the political point of view nor from the socio-political perspective, and also for the sanitary situation given the pandemic. However, I would also like to mention some challenges. One big challenge from the very beginning has been the wholesomeness of the comprehensive system. What does it mean in practice? And what will this mean in the practice from the end of August, when one of the institutions will not be here anymore? The Commission will not be operating, at least not as has been working during the last years. That means that there will be some asymmetries between institutions, but also thinking on the search of missing persons unit, and also in HEP, and also the claims by some victims and civil society, some macro cases about the forced disappearance, knowing that there are limitations at HEP. Those are tensions and dilemmas. That's a point that I see as one of the challenges that still remains. Secondly, I would like to say the core of the victims, the expectations of the victims, and connected with that, the differential approach. First, we must say something trivial. There are not victims. There's not the universe of victims. The universe of victims is heterogeneous. However, this being said, I must say there was a lot of interest to participate. The reports that have delivered to the HEP, the more than 30,000 testimonies and more. But we know that 30,000 testimonials are a small portion if we think on the 10 million victims. So we're still missing a lot to listen to. We are still falling short to know, maybe not from the commission, but of the system of the country. And yesterday, Mr. Ledegoff was talking about the importance of slow or gent listening, slow, slowly listening to all. If we listen to the victims carefully, we run short of time. Also, pay attention to the access to institutions, and I want to highlight your territorial work. For instance, access to institutions for people who don't live in Colombia. And in there, the Commission, with that summary in chapter about exile, Colombia, outside Colombia, has made something that is an after, before and after, as for the Truth Commissions in the recommendations. And there I would like to quote something. It says, as a matter of fact, is the last page of that summary related to the participation of victims in exile. In exile, the mechanisms of the comprehensive system. The Commission recommends exile and refuge, given the permanence dimension of violence is part of the cases under the jurisdiction of HEP. They must be virtual spaces must be officialized to carry out judicial hearings from overseas with proceeding guarantees. And also considers that mechanism should be coordinated so that victims in other countries can access to the work of the Search of Missing Persons unit. That's one of the challenges. It's not easy. And also for the people that don't live in the townships. The people living in the townships need resources, inputs to reach their temporal resources. Maybe people that don't speak Spanish as their mother tongue. Maybe that's not their mindset, but all of that within the differential approach, within cross-sectional approaches are challenges. And I believe that we can learn from those contributions of the academy that have studied this. I'd like to quote Rivero, who did this based on the case number 2 with women from the indigenous group of Agua. And also thinking on the participation, for example, within HEP of victims. If we think in that number, 6,402, how can they participate, that many victims and relatives, in those processes? I think those are challenges connected to the expectations of the victims, not only as for participation, but also in regards to reparation. I believe there is a risk of disappointment. What can we learn from the transitional justice? Again, what you're doing, not only here in Colombia, but also in other places in the world. The differential approaches, cross-sectional approaches. There, Buenaventura talks about the decolonization of transitional justice. How to do that? How to do it if we think on the theoretical fundamentals of transitional justice? They come from a very liberal theoretical fundament, which is not what you search or seek in decolonization. How to do that? As we saw yesterday, today in the morning with Alejandro Castillejo, the topic of nature as a victim, which is also within HEP. This is a challenge. how to prosecute in these processes. These are challenges that go beyond Colombia. And I would also like to say, mention the challenges of the perpetrators, the third parties, and entrepreneurs, for example. In fourth place, and that's the topic in a debate in transitional justice. This is a relatively new, recent debate. To what point should we go beyond transitional justice to something that we could call maybe a transforming and a justice? For example, in the commission, we did emphasis on chauvinism, homophobic, structural racism, and maybe classism, but how to do it amidst these exclusions and inequalities. So what can transitional justice do to transform those forms of exclusion to have a more just and less exclusive country? And the last aspect that I wanted to say is something that we have elaborated upon a lot yesterday and today, the topic of education, about the findings of the Commission, but also the whole comprehensive system. There, knowing that a lot of work has been done, but also acknowledging that there's still work to do, is a task that can never be taken for granted. I believe that we need a national debate about the past and its implications. And now we have talked about the importance of taking this to schools, universities, and to the communities, to the neighborhoods. But I wanted to go further, and I was quoting a philosopher, Latin American philosopher, a musician. Dare yourself, or in Spanish, atrévete. This is not a possibility to say December the 10th, Day of Human Rights. Let's invite the companies a morning, one afternoon, to release the employees, but not free to be at home, but to do reflection on the past and what it means for the future. Either Avianca, Ecopetrol, Crepes and Waffles, and many others couldn't do that, even if maybe from the institutions as the state, from the ministries, from the institutions of the comprehensive systems, from the universities. If we cannot do it, because there we could reach to what we actually need. Stop talking about what we feel many times. Sometimes we talk before the people who are somehow believe and are aware. And I believe that we need controversy. We need to, with ownership, to do those debates with ownership. It doesn't mean that we need a controversy that is valid with everything. Thanks to HEP, thanks to the Commission, and thanks to the unit, we have something where we cannot say 2 plus 2 is not 5, world is not shallow, but to discuss on which have been the root causes and what are the possibilities to move on. Thank you very much.
Querido Stefan, muchas gracias.
Dear Stefan, thank you very much for the 5 reflections. They also collect part of the elements that have been mentioned, but in coordination directly with the whole comprehensive system, which is very important for us. We will keep it as input for the conversation that we will have. So we have the full table. I'll open the floor, thanking Roberto for being here for this space. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria, for your invitation and the possibility to participate in this important scenario, privileged space, as these reflection days and work days have been about the comprehensive system of peace and justice in Colombia. The panelists will have the challenge and the privilege to carry on the last panel, the last session. I understand this is a challenge, but also this is an opportunity. It's the opportunity to consolidate, to nail it with ideas, with reflections, specific reflections, the target of this specific panel, and it is trying to individualize, to identify, to highlight which aspects, which components, which elements have provided the system, three institutions of the system, in the development of its mandate that could be considered contributions, relevant contributions to the world as for transitional justice. I will try to do it kind of a dictatorship manner, to share this methodology, encouraging each one of you and also in the institutions to be very specific, very brief in your reflections, in your conversation of some topics that I will propose. At the beginning, I'll talk about privilege. Another privilege will be to close this panel, this conversation, based on three different perspectives. We will take a look from that perspective, from the institutional perspective of the three agencies that made up the system. They included the unit of search of missing persons, but also we will have the perspective of the victims in the opinion of one of them, and the opinion of those who have participated in the conflict and have been accountable of impacts in the opinion of one of them. And I will introduce the people that I insist will have the challenge to answer to these questions that I will ask. Thank you, Stefan, for providing inputs on achievements and challenges, which are some topics that we will elaborate upon. Eduardo Cifuentes, president of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace since 2020. He studied law in the Andes universities, and he did a master's degree in the Complutense University of Madrid with experience in constitutional matters. In 1999, he was appointed ombudsman until his resigned in 2003. Between 2009 and 2003 and 2005, he was member of the Hague Court and special attaché for the treatment of conflicts in the International Organization of International Labor Organization, Marina Monzón. Since February 19th, 2018, is the director of search unit of search of missing person, the framework of the armed conflict. She is lawyer from the German-Colombian University, magister in the National University, and specialist in forensic and criminalistic sciences. She worked in the proceedings of municipal and circuit tribunals. He was judge in the military tribunal and professor in the Industrial de Santander and Externado University. She was also representative of the social organizations before the Commission of the Unit of Search of Missing Persons, an agency that was created in 2000. Francisco de Rue, president of the Commission for the Coexistence and Non-Repetition Commission, Jesuit priest, did studies in philosophy, theology, as well as a PhD. In 2016, he received a PhD honoris causa of the Superior Council of the National University of Colombia, has devoted his life to the work for the construction of peace, reconciliation, and dignification of the victims of armed conflict. He assisted the process of listening to the victims in the peace process developed in Havana. Helena Urán, politologist with studies of undergraduate and masters in linguistic and media and tradition studies, has worked in Colombia, Germany, and the United States in different realms of politics, research, communication, and journalism, with special approach to human rights, justice, migration, and memory politics. Her father was murdered in the assault of Justice Palace, which happened more than 3 decades ago. She has had different relationships with the three agencies of the Comprehensive System for Peace. Finally, Victoria Sandino, signatory of peace and former congresswoman. She is part of the Commission of the Implementation of the Peace Agreements. In 2013, she incorporated the delegation in Havana as only women spokeswoman in the peace process. She contributed especially of gender equality in the agreements under the subcommission of gender. Is one of the leaders of insurgent feminism led by former ex-combatants from the FARC. She has had different levels of relationship also with the three agencies of the system. The method that I propose for this afternoon will be the next one. I will propose a number of questions. Some of them, and I will highlight with clarity, will be addressed to only one of the panelists. In that case, I beg you, please, to answer exclusively the question. Don't take more than 3 or 4 minutes, please. Those who are not recipients of this question can add something, can have a reaction, can contribute a reaction, a brief 1 minute or 2 minute reaction. I don't know how I control this, but you can help me out with this. The other questions will be common for all the panelists. In that case, since there will be 5 opinions for each of the questions, the timing will be shorter. I will ask you to do it in less than 3 or 2 minutes for each question. I would like to start my first question, honing on a dimension that I understand. It's a cornerstone and elevates to the humanitarian ethical level. It has to do with the dignification and dignity of victims. This will be one of the common questions for the 5 panelists. For institutions, members of the system, I'd like to ask you to tell us, in the development of the duties that you were entrusted, what have you been able to highlight? What have you learned? What has your work produced? The implementation of the mandate as for effective dignity for victims from the institutional perspective. Also, Helena, I will ask you from the personal perspective of a victim, and Victoria from the perspective that you represent as a cannibal in this scenario. Is there freedom of action? There is freedom of action. Anybody can jump in and start right away. 2 or 3 minutes to share your reflections or your assertions. Thank you. Otherwise, my finger democracy will operate. Luz Marina, I see that you are excited and you want to start. I'll start. Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm honored to be here commemorating the legacy. I want to clarify that I've never been judge of military, criminal, judge. I was criminal instruction judge. So to clarify on that, what have we learned about the victims? And I would say that we have learned about the dignity. The unit has learned that victims not only have information, as sometimes the institutions with institution believe, we look for them just to receive information, but they are also political subjects that build not just from the relationship of the institutions, but from the demand of their rights. I would like to share in these 3 minutes three histories, three stories that the unit has been able to assist, that has had the honor to assist and contribute to the relief of sufferings. And there are stories, some of them shared with the comprehensive system. One of them is having found finally the body of a girl that was recruited in 2001 in the Commune 13 of Medellin. She, along with 24 youngsters, as she was 16 years old, they were recruited by an illegal armed group and taken to war. And they died. They were killed in action. That's what the information states. Her mom uh, looked for her for a long time, and she talked about the political subjectivity. She could be in one of two graveyards, Santo Domingo graveyard, or I don't remember. There's another one nearby, and we managed to assist her to go to this place. And in that common grave that you see in this graveyard, we recovered her body. This was very interesting because the lady was able to see how we were taking out the body, and she was able to recognize the body. It was just bone after many years. How can you recognize that? Because she recognized in one of the bone structures a chain, a religious chain, and she remembered that her daughter never let go that chain. So that's like the DNA of the relative. The second story that I want to tell you is the story, and it's a struggle, more than 20 years a struggle to give dignity for that daughter, to find her and to close this case and to give closure to this case. It's not just a demised person, it's an alive person who meets her family. She was recruited just 12 years old. She was just 12 years old. She became part of the armed group. She had to file her paperwork, and she didn't have the accurate information because at 12 years old she didn't remember about the information of her family. And this is a meeting, a re-encounter, and I want to she used the word I wore down the my shoes trying to find her. And the other one is the Familia Angulo story. Familia Angulo went to the Truth Commission and they gave their testimonial. They went to the jurisdiction, special jurisdiction for peace. She went to the unit, the search unit, and asked it to search their loved ones. My 3 minutes expired, but I think that it's very important to tell you with examples what have we learned from about dignity. In this family, when we were recovering the body, the anthropologist had organized the ground where we were going to perform the search, and that man over there with the green sweater told the anthropologist, I want you to tell me if you can change the order to approach this space. And she asked him why. He said, because I would like you to look for in this section, and told him why. The anthropologist said, do you have a feeling? Yes, I have a feeling. And the anthropologist said, yeah, we will start tomorrow from that chunk. And they prayed yesterday, as the Chiva Cortez has told the, their children. Miss Carbenza, during the kidnapping, had prayed every day at 6 p.m. She was praying every afternoon. And the next day they undertook the search in that place that the relative told, and there we found Miss Carmenza. That is dignity, and that is what we have learned. It's not just information providers. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Thank you. Luz Marina. Eduardo Cifuentes. Well, thank you for having me today. First of all, I would like to greet the members of the panel and all of you as well. I want to answer this question from the perspective of the comprehensive peace system, not only on the jurisdiction, special jurisdiction for peace. And in this sense, as I see it, we have an idea about the victims because they are the victims of serious violations of human rights, international humanitarian law, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. As just like still people sitting down. I think the experience of the different institutions in this system has shown that, on the contrary, there is a lot of dignity in the country, and this dignity is in the victims, is stored in the victims. This has all the sense. Using Luz Marina's last words, I think as providers of the truth, we observe the role of dignity. This is dignity that wanted to occupy the space of truth, the dignity of people who have been collecting and gathering the truth directly. They had it, they were sleeping with it, it was all the time in their everyday lives, penetrating their existence. It was always there. When the peace agreement and the constitutional standards implemented, the other legal standards that developed it, created the right channels in these three institutions, the Commission for Growth of the Truth, the Missing Persons Unit, and the GEP were channels that the victims used copiously. For example, in the case of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the criminal process is presided by the monopoly of the state in the exercise of criminal exercise. It's a topic of the state. However, here in transitional justice, the expropriation from the state will give place for the individuals of the process of transitional justice, the ones who perform this duty. And somehow the deponents, the victims, and the transitional justice is a coordinator, a moderator, a guidance. But actually, the social problem and the conflict is solved there, where we have different narratives in play. In this sense, we've seen a position that is strong from the victims. This is called dignity. Thanks to dignity, there was a report drafted, never published before, and its value for the truth is transcendental for the Commission. And this is thanks to the victims. Thanks to the victims, the unit has regional plans that had never been drafted before. And thanks to the victims, in the case of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, macro processes among others, due to the reports for the victims and the reports of human rights. In 95% of the cases, the deponents didn't have any other alternative but to bow down to the accusations derived from the comparison based on the victim reports. So, being the source of the truth is an expression of dignity. Now, the answer by the Colombian state and society should be a transformative answer. It is not only about sharing a truth or opening our hearts, exploring the past, bringing it to the present, but also looking for transformation and actual change in the country. And we have to do this. We need to respond to dignity. Finally, this dignity is transforming in a subjective sphere. In the first hearings, we saw that the dignity space is not restricted only to the victims, but those deponents who confess, who share what they did before the victims. We can go to a different subjectivity. And the victims, on the other hand, when they know the truth, when they face the truth, they recognize that they must go on with their life project, and at least they are mitigating their sorrow, their old sorrow they are carrying as a burden. So this is one. The comprehensive system for peace has hosted victims as dignified beings, and here they found a large reservoir of dignity that will feed the country in the future and will be the origin of amazing transformations. Thank you, Eduardo. Pacho, what has this journey taught us, teaches, and dignification and dignity of victims? Well, before answering your question, I would like to say that I feel so, how to put it, humbled, satisfied to be here on stage. Thank you, Eduardo, Luz, Marina, our partners from the system. We've been working with our heart. Thank you, Roberto, because the OAS, MAPP, since you were in the institution, this was key for us. Thank you, Helena, for being in Colombia, coming all the way to work for peace in this country. Thank you, Victoria, because you, despite the difficulties in religious terms, despite all the temptations, having 300 and something, more than 300 partners killed, you are still here fighting for peace. This is a great lesson learned for Colombia. Answering your question, I've seen a transformation in the world of victims from the recognition, from listening to the victims. This is the first thing we did, I think, particularly the victims of forced disappearance and the victims of false positives. When we have met these victims that are so hard, these meetings, first a brutal sorrow, brutal pain, rejection to the state, and condemning all the justice, condemnation of justice, rejection of perpetrators, and little by little in the conversations we recognize we need to open to dialogue. Except the first dialogues, there was brutal phasing of the truth and the request to know the truth from all stakeholders, but also transformation in the victims themselves, who grabbing their memories and the dignity of people who were killed. My son didn't have anything to do with it. My son was innocent. My father, who disappeared, was a great citizen working for this country. I want to vindicate my son's dignity, and this is full of strength In the same lines, the first thing I felt was that at some point the victim facing the victimizer or the perpetrator, recognizing his responsibility. I don't know if there are any of the former militaries who acknowledged the brutality of the crimes in the audience, but the victims held that suffering, and one thing they found was understanding the moral authority they had. The victims understood progressively that they have the moral authority to say, this is what happened to us. This is what we suffered brutally. We want transitional justice. Of course, we were expecting to know the truth, but something else we want to say. We don't want revenge. We don't want other people to suffer what we suffered. What we want is that this that happened will never happen again in Colombia. And they said with full moral authority, they only have the victims because they suffered that. And what you mentioned as well, the political stance. We're gonna fight for peace in this country above all. This is my view. This is what I feel. I think the victims have transformed us, have changes. This is the episode that occurred in Havana after telling the Colombian military, telling the guerrilla about the suffering of the victims and telling those horrible things. Look at what the Colombians are capable of when they want to break someone, to destroy someone. Atrocities. But the Colombians are not only this. Colombians can look into their eyes and shake hands again and venture to build a new country together. Thank you very much, Father Francisco. Helena, what's your view? Your opinion will be shorter. It's just a reflection. What's your reflection as a victim in your process, feeling dignified, obviously, by this stage of peace building? Thank you very much. I am Helena Urán. I thank you for having me today with this reputable group of people. Well, you were telling the experiences. I think it is also worth mentioning briefly our experience. I cannot speak on behalf of the victims. Many times we are in the same package as if we were the same. But I cannot speak on behalf of my family. I can speak on a personal basis. And what I can say is there are lots of victims who have shared a journey that has been there for many years, looking for justice. And we, those who suffered in the attack to the Palace of Justice, we had to wait for how many years? 22 years initially for the Attorney General's office to open the case of the Palace of Justice, and then that was a re-victimization, waiting for so many years since after the prosecutor was taken out of the case, concretely my father's case. Then we had to go to the international human rights law, and Colombia condemned Colombia for this action. And for me, and well, the importance of transitional justice, the comprehensive peace system. I'm talking about this case because this is what I experienced, feeling. It's a paradox. It's a paradox because it is so painful and so sorrowful to wait for an institution to recognize what happened to you when you know what you lived, what you experienced, and you know the truth. But other institution from abroad or local institution should accredit this truth. That's kind of funny because it's satisfying, but I have to wait for someone else to acknowledge what I'm saying. Anyway, for me, this was great support, feeling that other people were believing in us. We were not crazy, and actually, well, I was saying about my father. He was not a guerrilla member. He had not been killed by the guerrilla. He hadn't been killed by the bullets, lost bullets. He had been tortured and disappeared by the army forces of Colombia. And from there, in my particular case, this was the drive to raise my voice without any hesitation. And now talking about the comprehensive peace system. What is the question? Okay. Now, having this system in Colombia and other people not to experience this again, that's something coming from Colombia. This will shorten their journey, and in the universe of victims, in the end we understand that we are all the same in sorrow and pain, regardless of their perpetrators. There are different degrees of criminal responsibility among perpetrators, but in sorrow and pain, the victims are the same. And I know this because I was in the hearings in case 01. And, well, thank you, Helena. Well, Victoria, I know we have to be brief, less than 2 minutes. Don't worry. We think your opinion is totally relevant. I would like to say hello to everyone here, the top representatives of the system, Helena, and you as well, of course. I believe that dignification of victims is a process that started from Havana, but it is still an ongoing process. It is not finished. It started back in Havana when they started listening to the victims, when they acknowledged there was a universe of victims who had been produced and affected by the armed conflict. This is not a conflict as we see it of 20, 30 years. It's more than 6 decades of conflict. This is a factor we need to keep our eyes on. Helena was saying, how long have we waited? Actually, the generation of this victimization against the Colombian people and society comes back in time, comes from a long time ago. Second, this is the start of the process. Why? Because we, of course, recognize the progress we have made to this day. But this is just the beginning, because, as I see it, the topic of victims, dignification of victims, is going beyond. We need to know the truth, the total truth, the truth from all the stakeholders, not the two demons who pretend to create that. It is not about two demons, good and or evil and less evil. This society used violence in every way possible to remain in power. Others used it to transform reality. This is part of an acknowledgement, and this generated victimization. Third, of course, in addition to truth, justice. But justice, access to justice, is not only coming from the GEP or the ordinary justice, or even from the commission or the missing persons search unit. We're talking about social justice. Many of the victims who were taken away from their territories, who were expelled from the territories, or even the victims of disappearance, recruitment, false positives, or the executions, out of court executions, illegal executions, it minimized and removed the rights of people that were left behind. Today, the Colombian society, especially the Colombian state, have a historical responsibility. We are on the right path on this first step. If all the system, the special jurisdiction, the missing person search unit, and the commission managed to draft a report right now under the conditions of the country and the administration that we had, well, I believe that we have a lot of hope today for the victims and the society in general. This process is a responsibility of us all, and we will work tirelessly. Personally, I will work tirelessly and reiterate, and I've been in trouble because of this. I want to highlight that we will continue to work on building peace and going deep into the truth and justice for Colombian society who has been a victim. Thank you, Helena. Well, quickly, I think I didn't go straight to the point, but we are in a time of hope and change. It doesn't start with the change of administration and total peace and the support of the comprehensive peace system. We start with the institutions. And I think that not only for me, but this is the starting point for me that brings me back to Colombia, but for many other people, they are feeling they are recognized as human beings with rights, nor as subhuman or second-hand human beings. This is what we feel in Colombia due to impunity and feeling that we recovered our dignity and society acknowledges that pain we've suffered. And we are encouraged, or I am encouraged, to come here. The victims want to work for peace. Thank you. I would like to express that we have mistreated so much the method and the times. So I must say that dignification and dignity of the victims is worth it for one more minute, for each minute of life and in suffering. So very well used this time. We need to accelerate a little bit. We're going to talk about technically about the system. Very briefly, please. From the logic of the system, there are some questions. Pacho, from your perspective, what is the greatest achievement of the system? Luz Marina, what is the greatest challenge the system has faced today? Eduardo, from the perspectives, objectives, from the beginning of the sign, the greatest element that has not been satisfied, the greatest need that needs to be satisfied as a system. Victoria and Helena, can you please tell us briefly about a difficulty or an achievement that was not met from your perspective. Okay. Greatest achievement first. 2 minutes each, please. Okay. That's a complex question, but Roberto, I think that the greatest achievement would be the truth, the happening of the truth. The country understood that human dignity, we were talking about, we will reach that if we have courage, if we are bold enough to go against our fears, the fear of asking what actually happened in this country, among this deep sorrow and pain, and feeling and knowing that since 1985 to till 2008 there were some concrete names in their list. 451,000 people who died because of war, only because of the war. They would be alive if there had been no war. And also some of your people, Victoria, around 90,000 young women and men died from the army, the paramilitary, the guerrilla, the police. 90,000 young people in a senseless war. And in addition, of every 10 people who died, 8 were civilians. And something Victoria mentioned, it is not only struggle between the FARC and the army. This is a disaster, and the system has placed the truth on the front, and we're building on it. This is why Stefan's invitation, I was listening to you on my phone, the invitation to continue positioning the truth through education in the country, so that the country will not be afraid of the truth, and we can build the system on the truth. Thank you. Ms. Marina? Okay. The challenge is written here. I'm going to read it. I totally agree, Stefan, with you. After 5 years, the greatest challenge is completeness. And what is it in practice? The design of the system is so important. It is very well planned in terms of the needs of the victims. The victims don't only need one answer, but a set of answers that gather everything they experienced. It wasn't only disappearance, there were a lot of other things, and they have greater expectations than finding their loved ones. So when I was writing this, integrality, completeness, and the methodology for completeness is the greatest challenge. I understand that the comprehensive system as a system is so powerful to repair victims, to avoid institutional duplicity, lack of coordination among institutions, and contradictory answers or delays in the answers. This is what the completeness should address. All the institutional practices will bring lack of hope and increase the damage and harm on the victims. And the construction of transitional justice, implementation of transitional justice, the challenge is transformation. You also mentioned that. What do we need to transform? The relationship of the state and the victims, and the coordination. I think the system has brought this to the table, or maybe it is brought as a principle. A coordinated and response within the system would avoid more harm. And I believe that this has been the challenge, and it is not permanent. This challenge has been due to different timing. The commission started running. We were trying to design and the jurisdiction was thinking about the methodologies, the procedure, the we were in different timings. So this concept couldn't be commissioned immediately, but we learned so many lessons. This challenge will be, um, it will be overcome. It will be important for peace building.
Thank you, Luz Marina. Two achievements and frustrations of the comprehensive system for peace. Marina mentioned one of the first one of them, and it is a low short synergy in an initial state wherein each of the agencies that made up the system were barely beginning, and they had problems to complete the regulation baseline. They had to have the appropriate mechanisms, technology, budget, hearings, determination, and so on and so forth. And therefore, that capacity to circulate the final outcomes was not easy. Notwithstanding the above, the regime of conditions is the one that balances the benefits granted by HEP, which allowed some uh, some of the people that were interviewed to have the possibility to actually be interviewed. But the synergy was important in the first trench, or in the first stretch, but it will be presented, will take place a major mutual benefit in terms of truth, benefit, justice, and reparation and non-repetition. This harvest of truth by the Clarification Commission is for the special peace jurisdiction, and for the unit it's truly a powerful tool to deepen into the exercise of their skills, and also at the same time for victims to achieve truth that then becomes judicial truth and then turns into meetings in the case of missing persons and deepening of the regional plans. Now, achievements that are the result of historical accidents and national disgrace. And the thing is that these agencies that make up the system, at a certain degree, we must confess that we are fragile, because we must be channels to receive truth. We must inspire trust to the victims that resort to the comprehensive system to share what happens to them in 6 decades of conflict, and also trust with the people attending the hearings and the interviews. But the murder of more than 300 ex-combatants of former FARC, the murder of social leaders in the regions, more than 1,000 social leaders, the absence of the state in the mostly affected territories, where you have appearing persons and victims, and at the same time a low rate of real implementation of the commitments that arise from the peace agreement, created a setting that made difficult the exercise of the skills, the fully exercise of the skills. More than 6 simultaneous conflicts is something very difficult for agencies. Wouldn't be brittle, but barriers of hope and change, if others had been the conditions. Had other been the conditions, I believe that it is necessary to have a total peace. I believe that it's necessary in the case of the special jurisdiction for peace not only to grant benefits from the beginning, even if they are intermediate or provisional, but the appearing persons to carry out reparation and to instill mechanisms for the works in charge of the appearing persons are incorporated into big projects from the state where effectively that can become a reality, sustainable and feasible. So what used to be conceived as a simultaneous exercise of truth, reparation, non-repetition, resurrecting terrorist victims that meet themselves roads of progress and social stabilization didn't happen. And I truly say, I confess, dear Roberto, that it has been a miracle. It's been a miracle arising from the victims and the eagerness of these agencies. We have today a system that is starting to meet their own targets. We have begun and we continue in amid an adverse climate. We cannot deny that. Leaders and ex-combatants are still being murdered. There is not a real demobilization with guarantees. We don't see a state that is producing important projects. I repeat, to to incorporate victims and ex-combatants. Without total peace, it's not possible to have 100% performance from the exercise of our skills. Eduardo, Victoria, Elena, I'd like, we have heard Stefan, Los Marina, Eduardo, Francisco, to talk about achievements, difficulties, frustrations, expectations not met for factors like the design and the operation of the system, the context. Uh, I will ask you to choose one option, one achievement, one difficulty, one expectation not achieved from your personal perspective as a victim and from your individual perspective as ex-member of FARC and as member of that group that is also part of the implementation.
Yo,
Well, I think one of the achievements of the comprehensive system for peace compels us all as society to face this past of violence and help us to go through this collective traumas is a collective trauma that we all have gone through, and we have lived that kind of uh, ghost scheme, uh, and leads us to ask, why did it happen? Who allowed it to happen? What was the role of everyone for this to happen, to make this possible? This is not just a matter of perpetrator and victim. There are many stakeholders, and we all must wonder what was the role of each one. That's one of the biggest achievements of the comprehensive system, although there is resistance from those who don't want to accept. Hopefully one day they accept it. For the victims, I believe oftenly legal processes and understanding help us to uh, understand this. The shock can take many years to assimilate. It helps us to assimilate. Thank you very much. I'd like to talk about the absence and the difficulties.
Incluso de la discusión.
And this was part of the discussion in Havana, and I want to draw it on very briefly. At least in my case as comprehensive system, I had more expectations. To comply that role as comprehensive system and transitional justice, I mean a restorative justice, and even more. Today, the punitive nature, which is still there, living in the system, didn't allow the universe of the Colombian society which is engaged, which was engaged in the conflict, has participated and still participate in the system. I believe that is one absence, and it's still a problem. We agree, as president of HEP says, we join total peace, a peace that involves all the sectors, but we should touch the wounds of those who suffered and the responsibilities of those who participated directly or indirectly in this conflict to be able to collect the universe of victims. Awesome. Thank you, Victoria.
Cerrando,
We should wrap up. We will reduce some of the topics that were of the interest of everybody to work.
por favor, una última reflexión.
I will ask you to share a last message. It's not even a reflection, it's just a final message. There is an invitation, it's just an invitation. If this message could identify a contribution and a specific contribution on the design and implemented so far from and through the system, we can attribute it to the world in the matter of transitional justice. One contribution of the experience. We could issue a 1-minute message that we could have covered today, the experience of the victims, the people, the experience of the accountable person in the institution. I will start with Francisco. 1 minute. I invite you all to take seriously the recommendations, to take the recommendations of the Truth Commission seriously, as they are introduced here. The big or total peace with ELN, with dissidents of defectors of FARC, and the groups that must be subjected to justice. Secondly, the transformation of security system, instead of security for property and more security for more property and maximum security for the maximum property, security for the people equally. We do take care of a kid on Choco the same way you take care of a member or congressman, and also an education labor in depth about peace in this country, and to fight decisively against impunity through the strengthening of the system of transitional justice system. Danilo is just arriving. It's good to have you with us.
Gracias. Luz Marina.
Thank you, Francisco. Los Marina. In this minute, I hope to make it, I hope I can make it, a fundamental contribution of the comprehensive system is having included early the search of the missing persons. The agreement signed before the signature of the agreement in 2015, and it was those trust actions to provide information on the missing persons, having included a mechanism that would take care of the search for missing persons and to acknowledge the suffering, the loneliness and indifference of thousands and thousands of victims in this country is the most important contribution for peace building. That made a difference, where they included within the Truth Commission to tell something but not the search for missing persons. Having acknowledged the fight, the dignity, and the claim, the legitimate claim of the victims in Havana, creating a mechanism, specific mechanism for the search for missing persons was fundamental. I close with the next thought. The conclusions of the report of the Truth Commission propose that we had the opportunity to talk about this. It is necessary to have coordination of the state to be able to move forward, to find the missing persons, to identify more than 25,000 bodies without identification, to expedite the identification of the people whose bodies we are finding to strengthen the Forensic Institute, the regional search plans to dialogue with the macro cases of the special jurisdiction for peace, but also with the appropriate actions. That is key for the search for missing persons, and this is an essential contribution for peace building. The relief of suffering is the basis for peace in the country. Eduardo, the question is about the contribution to the world from the experience and the regulation base of the comprehensive system for peace. I believe a first contribution, and a big one, is to accredit before the world that you cannot resign neither the judicial truth nor the extrajudicial truth nor the search for missing persons. In other contexts, all the Truth Commission operates only, but here it has been demonstrated that it's compatible and necessary. A Truth Commission also maintaining the seek for judicial truth and the search for missing persons. That is a historical contribution of the comprehensive system. The second one is the dialogue baseline, as Father Deroux said, the capacity to listen. In addition to the capacity to listen is the dialogue capacity. It's exceptional what is happening in Colombia with the special jurisdiction for peace in the search unit as two surviving agencies. On the one hand, for crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, which in the criminal international and national systems is punished through judicial proceedings, strict proceedings, and with sentences of prison, to give the opportunity to resolve this by the conversation between the appearing victims and the intervention of judges, is unprecedented from the point of view of the world of the compared law. And it has been demonstrated that that dialogue is producing in HEP that 95% of sentences that have conversation base is accepted by the appearing persons. So that conversation system works even for aspects that in other countries are dealt with heavy instruments, rough instruments. And finally, it's been demonstrated to the world that it is not about only to recover the past through these institutions, but also this justice and this truth has prospective value, a foundational, transformational value. Somehow we are entering into a new constitutive process of the Colombian society, of the nation as a whole. Those are three contributions, valuable contributions of the comprehensive system to the world. Thank you very much.
Yo considero que
I consider that the main contribution that we give to the world in these conditions is the system in itself. With all the elements that you have proposed, I think it's unprecedented within this process that we had been working on, and do not unattended, dear colleagues from the institutions, from the agreement and the system, is that this is not, for instance, in the case of HEP, a court of defeated or winners against defeated people. It's a conversational tribunal, and the search unit, of course, it's an innovative aspect and dignity building aspect. And the Truth Commission, which is not just a work of the truth as such, but also non-stigmatization or ostracism, is something that we must keep working for, that stable justice and that total peace that we want to implement in other scenarios. Thank you, Victoria. We will close the session. Sorry, Helena, I had left you for the staring closure Is the same question? Yeah. What I admire of this system is how it managed to synchronize respect for international justice standards with our right to truth and justice and right to peace, rather, in Colombia, in the one hand, and the fact that there are different agencies working jointly with different discipline, different skills from each institution seeking the same target and now thinking of the contribution to the world. Recently, there was a sentence issued against a Russian soldier, a tribunal in Ukraine, to 63 years of prison for having, he said, obeying orders from his commanders. From here we can show that there are other more effective ways. Well, I also have something that I would like to contribute, maybe to improve or to keep in mind in regards to the system. And this is based on the dialogues in Havana that were appealing to me. Why the case of Justice Palace was not included. Why there were no victims of that case? Oh my God, it's something that split the history of Colombia in two. It should be considered at the time of selecting the people that will be characters of these events. From the moment that HEP accepts a coroner, the magistrate in charge of the military criminal justice says, this was not a matter of chance. Why did you skip Justice Palace? Why did you skip this? Then the military. These are things that we must refine, and it's important to give more opportunities to children to tell. I was 10 years old when tortured execution and torture of my dad happened, and when we were kicked off Colombia, and nobody never asked us. It's always the adults who speak for the children, but the children are also embedded in this violence. It's good to give them the possibility. There are certain difficulties. They must be assisted by an adult to make this possible, to make possible children to have a word, because that helps them to go through the mourning and to go through that pain process. There is a chapter in the report of the Truth Commission, which I think is great, but it would be important to include them even further, and to subpoena third parties in all the land aspect. Thank you. We will close this panel. I want to ask you just 1 minute, one more minute, to thank once again the Truth Commission for having assisted the MAPP, in my case, to participate as moderator in this scenario. I'd like to share with modesty a contribution, a suggestion. I believe this could be a contribution of the process to the world, and a suggestion. Respectfully, by the way. I think that the commitment and the intensity of the assistance and international support to the system, to peace building on a daily basis in the territories, as we have to do, that level of commitment and intensity, it's a contribution to be considered in the design of other processes in the world. Understanding of course, that the main players is not the international community, but the institutions and the community of the country. The invitation also vis-a-vis, more than an invitation, a suggestion to the transitional justice system in the world for peace building, is that when national stakeholders are thinking, designing, and invite international community, convene the international community to be engaged, to assist, to support, to do it in a broader sense. The sense of international community is as wider as possible and not exclusive, with a sense of cooperation. Not all the states and the societies have the possibility to cooperate financially by funding with resources. We can cooperate with supportiveness. You can cooperate with technical assistance, with human support. But the invitation as contribution, I cannot be so haughty to consider the next design on in the other design of transitional justice a wide, broader participation of the international community. Thank you very much again, and special acknowledgement to the panelists. Thank you, Roberto.